serving as Deputy Chief Diversity Officer. I want to start with a warm welcome and thank you to everyone joining us on day 4 of our inaugural Free Speech Week here at UC Merced. This week has been so amazing, informative, insightful, and very powerful. I'm honored to introduce the session today, Using Our Voices Together, Collaborations Between Students and Administrators to Address Campus Speech Challenges. We are in for a treat, y'all, with some amazing leaders. As an event reminder, please note that today's session will be recorded to ensure that you have access to it on our website after we wrap up the week. I also want to extend my sincere appreciation to our sponsor. All events during Free Speech Week have been possible due to the funding provided by the University of California National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to the center and for supporting our collective learning. As we open up the space, I also want to take some time to reflect on the land by which we carry our work and learning on. Local Indigenous people, including the Yokuts and Miwok, who understand the earth. Oh, give me 1 second, sorry. Thank you. I will restart. Energy, here we go. Local Indigenous people, including the Yokuts and Miwok, who understand the earth as a place for everyone, first inhabited the land where UC Merced is located. When we address diversity on this campus, we do so boldly, daring to look forward and backward, imagining diversity's demand for the 21st century and the importance of diversity in addressing past wrongs, reaffirming humanity, and ensuring a reconciliatory path of redress for the future. The most prominent path on our campus is called Scholars Lane. By day, you can see, hear, and witness the embodiment of our diversity through campus community members making their way across campus, framed by the slopes and peaks of the Sierra Nevada. Sorry about that. So we say this reflection to not only honor and recognize this history, but also as an invitation for everybody here to reflect on the following questions. What intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this land acknowledgement? And also, what is your organization doing beyond acknowledging whose land and labor allow you to live, work, and learn in that space? So please take these reflections always throughout our learning experiences here. And remember that it's part of our collective work to bring honor to our spaces. So I'm gonna introduce our colleague Onar to walk us through some of our community principles.
Thank you, Cynthia. Again, my name is Onar Primitivo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I serve as the Executive Director for Equity and Justice in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And so part of our conversation after the panel is our community agreements that we have shared throughout each an event during Free Speech Week. And just going to go ahead and share them with you, and also will remind that this dialogue in the chat that we agree to speak for ourselves and allow others to speak for themselves with no pressure to represent or explain to the whole group. We agree to listen with resilience, hanging in when something is hard to hear, right? Grappling with multiple perspectives, and yet striving for intellectual humility. We agree to consider asking a question to check out the assumption we are making rather than taking that assumption as fact. That we agree to share airtime, participate within the suggested time frame. We agree to not interrupt except to indicate that we cannot or did not hear the speaker. We agree that when we discuss our experience with people who are not present, we will not attach names or other identifying information unless we have permission to do so, because consent is very, very important. And then we agreed that to this space, this is a space of learning, recognizing that no one, myself, the speaker, is able to know all, or our guests to know all things in that the space, and that we are all in the process of learning. And so the other piece I want to offer is that, to identify where our learning edges are and then push it. For example, whenever you think I already know this, ask yourself, how can I take this deeper, or how am I applying it in my practice, that what I already know? So these are our community agreements as you join us in this virtual event. This is what we are honoring and valuing. And now I turn it to Michelle, who will introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Onar. That was a beautiful introduction, and I think I'm going to print out your community agreements and keep them close by. They're a great example. I really want to start by expressing my gratitude to the DEI office at UC Merced, not only for inviting our panel to participate today, but also for putting together such an incredible week. The center is proud to have been able to be a tiny part of making that possible. All of you are in for a treat today. We have 4 incredibly thoughtful, interesting panelists tonight, all of whom bring a unique perspective to these issues. Before we dive into hearing from them, I want to take like 1 or 2 minutes just to review a few basic constitutional law principles. And probably by the end of this week, it's all review, which is fine. The First Amendment was created to constrain government power. So it applies to government entities like state and local governments and like public institutions of higher learning, such as the University of California. The way that the First Amendment operates is that decisions that governments, like administrators at UC Merced, make about expression have to be content neutral. That means that the rules cannot be based on what people are saying. For instance, you cannot have a rule that says protests are allowed on Scholars Lane except about immigration. That would be based on the subject matter of the speech. You also can't say protests are allowed on Scholars Lane about immigration, but only pro-immigration perspectives are permitted, because that would be based on the viewpoint of the speech. So what can universities do? They can make what are called content neutral restrictions. For instance, people can use amplified sound at protests between 12 and 1 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This applies no matter what the content of the speech is, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the Federalist Society, whether it's about politics or about social issues. It's sort of an all or nothing choice for the university. Once you open a space to speech, you really can't discriminate based on who is talking and what they are saying. This in turn allows individuals and groups to speak on campus who have ugly, offensive, hurtful, and harmful things to say. Our democracy protects horrible speech in order to protect all speech. Not everyone agrees that hateful speech should be protected, and I wish we had more time to discuss that question tonight. But tonight, our discussion really works within the contours of constitutional jurisprudence and focuses on this question. If hateful speech is protected at a public university like UC Merced, a university that values equity and inclusion, how do we as members of the campus community respond to and address hateful speech? What our panelists will highlight tonight is how the collaborative response between students and administrators can be effective. There is a narrative that exists today that supporting free expression and supporting diversity, equity, inclusion are mutually exclusive, that you have to choose one or the other. I believe that narrative is false and damaging. I believe that only by these values working in concert can we achieve the type of climate that we want. The issues that this Free Speech Week has raised and focused on are hard. They're really, really hard. And we don't come to this panel with answers. Our goal is to prompt you to think more deeply, more broadly, more robustly about the First Amendment with all of its strengths and all of its flaws. So with that, I want to introduce you to our panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about each of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to start by describing a speech-related challenge that they faced in their time on campus. And we're going to start with Latrice Carl. Latrice serves as the Associate Dean of Students for the Office of Student Rights and Responsibilities, OSRR, at UC Merced. As a proud member of the founding staff, Latrice joined UC Merced in 2005. Since that time, Latrice led the creation, growth, and development of the Office of Student Life and is now advancing the OSRR areas of student conduct and integrity programs, conflict mediation and resolution, restorative practices, and community standards. Latrice, will you kick us off by talking about a free speech challenge that you've encountered?
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm so excited to be here. It's such an honor to be with you all, and just to say congratulations on such an amazing inaugural Free Speech Week. So as I thought a little bit about a free speech challenge that I've faced, one in particular comes to mind, though there have been many over the years during my time at UC Merced. The most pivotal free speech challenge that I faced was really during the run-up to the 2016 presidential election. Our student groups were tabling, they were hosting events, they were demonstrating over issues in the national dialogue. The language and the signage used during that time was beyond provocative, and oftentimes focused on groups and not just the issues. As a result of some of the speech that was used, there were clashes between opposing groups, there were protests and counter-protests, there were complaints and confrontations, even some altercations, and some of the most powerful emotions that I've seen expressed on all sides of the issues. This situation really raised questions of student rights, of free speech, issues of social justice, brought up questions about student conduct, university policy, and the law. And I saw this situation impact our community in greater ways than any issue I've seen since I began working at UC Merced. It was definitely a challenging time for our community and put the issue of freedom of speech at the forefront.
Thank you so much, Latrice. In some ways, right, the 2016 election feels like 100 years ago, and yet it was really the beginning of kind of what's been a long haul. So we will come back to how your campus responded in those moments. In the meantime, I'm going to turn now to introduce you to Jason. Jason Braun is a current fourth-year UC Merced student, majoring in poli-sci and minoring in anthropology. Jason's first 3 years at UC Merced consisted of advocacy in student government, where he called for greater accessibility of funding for marginalized communities on campus. Jason is currently a student intern for the Office of the Dean of Students and Associate Vice Chancellor, as well as the director of the UC Merced Law Clinic. Jason, welcome. Will you share with us a free speech challenge?
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that kind introduction. I'm really grateful to be here as well and to share thoughts and perspectives from a student standpoint and perspective as well. I think one of the most frustrating encounters of free speech during my time here at UC Merced was really based around student government and responding to an organization that had utilized really hateful, destructive rhetoric targeting certain marginalized communities on campus. And the frustrating aspect of that was, how do we as student leaders address those concerns? How do we best represent individuals of all communities? How can we uplift and advocate the voices of those affected greatly? And for a time, there was absence, there was a void, there was a vacuum, and we didn't know how to respond. So we really reached out to the community and we really found the root causes of where those sentiments originated from. So by far, that sort of rhetoric I've never seen before in my entire life. And I have yet to see that again, which I'm grateful for on campus, where a lot of community collaboration and cultivation has occurred. But yes, thank you. That was the most challenging free speech challenge that I've ever encountered. And I'm really looking forward to elaborating on the solution that the student government proposed.
I'm looking forward to hearing that also. Now we're going to turn to our third amazing panelist, which is Kamyar Nakui, who is currently a 1L at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. He too is a former UC Merced grad student. He is a current grad, a former student, sorry. And he worked closely during that time with the Dean of Students as the Director of Student Success and Campus Climate. In those roles, he worked on a variety of projects, including developing policy around free speech and expression, increasing transparent communication between staff and students, and helping to establish the Multicultural Center on campus. So Kamyar, tell us about a free speech challenge.
Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to today's event. I share similar sentiments to the people who went before me. I'm very happy to be here, very proud of all the work that's been done. And as far as a free speech challenge during my time, around halfway into my journey at UC Merced, there was an outside group that came with posters displaying really extreme anti-abortion views. And these large posters had what appeared to be doctored and disturbing images of what they believed, or at least wanted to portray, what an abortion looked like. And so it was particularly challenging because not only did their demonstration go against my views, and many of my peers were visibly upset around me, but I also saw several of the people that I knew from campus agreeing with the protesters and really welcoming them and their ideas. In addition, there was a group of high schoolers, potential applicants to the university, passing by on a tour, and the idea that this was their first impression of UC Merced really saddened me. And so at the time, this demonstration really upset me, but the real challenge was reconciling with the fact that what they did was indeed protect constitutionally protected free speech, that the university could not censor them, and that the work that was left to do was between the administration and the students to figure out how do we move forward. And today we're really going to be focusing on that.
No, thank you. That was beautifully articulated. And I mean, and already just in the first few minutes of our discussion, we're already hitting on the key issues, right? We have things that happen with insiders in our community. We have things that happen with outsiders in our community, and things that cross over the two of those. So it becomes, very complicated. Last but never least is Melissa Bartholomew, who actually put together this panel. So we've got to give her a shout out. She is a doctoral candidate in public history with a designated emphasis in feminist studies at UC Santa Barbara. I am proud to share that she served as a 2019-20 Free Speech Fellow at the UC National Center. As a fellow, she created this incredible 100-page toolkit for student affairs administrators and university leaders to help them balance demands for freedom of speech and the promise of equal educational opportunities. She served as the intern and consultant for the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, assisting with special projects pertaining to free speech, campus climate, mental health services, and crisis management. Melissa, I know you have to choose from many of the challenges that you have faced. What will you share?
Well, first, I just want to thank everyone for having me here. I'm sad I wasn't able to come in person in April like we had planned, but due to COVID, this is the postponement, of the Free Speech Week, as well as my virtual residency. So if for any reason anyone falls in love with me, I love people, and you want to interact beyond this event, let me know, because I'm happy to interact with your community and wish I was there with all of you. So there are many incidents I could think of, but the one I wanted to share was the one that's actually been the most personally impactful for me, which was in 2017 when the college Republicans wanted to bring Ben Shapiro to come to our campus and talk about Black Lives Matter movement, but really it's like a very negative critique that I would say invokes anti-Blackness and is just not factually correct, a lot of the information he was coming to present. And so a number of student orgs were upset that student fees were going to be used by the student government funding the event. And so the Black Student Union was probably the most vocal student organization in responding and being upset, not wanting those student fees used or the event to happen on our campus. But there were many student organizations and others who were also very upset. So what I was thinking about in terms of challenges is there's of course the administration standpoint, and that's part of what I talked about a lot in the toolkit. But really when I think about this week at UC Merced, your events, and for me personally, I think what the challenges were that my eyes were open to was really working closely with one of the student leaders from the Black Student Union and seeing things from a different vantage point of the negative impact around feelings of safety, sense of belonging, self-worth, intersections of emotional and physical distress in terms of trying to launch a campaign on the campus and seeing a lot of criticism and hateful things via social media, or feeling like maybe some of the college Republican students were following her between her classes, as well as other Black Student Union members, and really seeing the toll that that was taking on her was making me really realize how different my thoughts and experiences might be around free speech with the body I inhabit and being an older grad student working with the administration and undergrad. So really trying to help work with her and support her, which when we talk in another question a little bit more about some of the solutions and positive things we did, I just want to say, of course, there's the positivity of activism, but we also have to think about whether or not we reify some of those same power dynamics when we're thinking about the students who are often tasked with responding or feel like they need to respond. And just really fast, there's a quote I wanted to share. Our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs talked to Black student organization members on our campus about campus climate years ago. And I just love this quote. He said, "Activism derives out of necessity. People only come here to study. They only come to get out of here with a degree. Activism comes out of what students need. Students should not have to do activism. They should be part of the decision-making process." And I just wanted to be able to bring that voice into our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot to think about. Before we jump to kind of ways to resolve and heal and move on, I want to ask a different question, because one of the things that makes this panel unique is that three of the panelists, Kamyar and Jason and Melissa, basically all had the experience of being a student activist who also worked as a student employee with administrators. And I think you have a very unique perspective, because I think all too often, it's often students and administrators. And what you guys represent is students and administrators. And so, Kamyar, I'm going to start with you. If you could just tell us a little bit about what was that experience like? Did it change your perspective? What are things that you learned that other folks might not know about the challenges that administrators and students face together?
Sure. So I think there's a misconception that administrators can censor offensive speech that is indeed constitutionally protected. I experienced firsthand the uncomfortable position that this puts administrators in, because not only do most of the time they find the speech offensive and that it harms them, but they also have to respond to the growing calls for punishment or censure to the offending party, calls that they know they can't fulfill due to the law as we know it. Then on the flip side, the offending individuals or groups, they expect no recourse because although offensive, their speech is protected and they feel they shouldn't receive any backlash from administrators. And so with that being said, I think there's some opportunities to help meet the goals and expectations of all parties involved. Like, for example, clear expectations, well-communicated expectations about what kind of speech or expression is indeed subject to administrative action and the limits of what that action is and what it looks like in practice. And I think another nuance of being a student worker is ensuring that your activism doesn't violate any neutrality that your role requires. When I worked in the Dean of Students office, I was very aware that I served all students regardless of identity, politics, or any other factors. And I had to be cognizant that any strong political stances I took could impact how comfortable students felt coming into our office and receiving services. And so I think what that ended up being in practice for me was being very transparent about my alignment with our school's values, namely the principles of community, any values that the UC system as a whole has, along with, of course, equity, access, diversity, but really trying to keep separate my professional presence and anything that I do outside of my role.
That's great. That's such a tricky thing and word, neutrality. And we could probably spend the whole night talking about who should and should not be neutral and when. But we won't stop there. We will turn to Jason, and you could tell us a little bit about your experience as a student working with administrators.
Thank you so much. So I had the dual role of working with administration and serving as a student government leader. And it was very fascinating because student government in itself is inherently political. And that experience really taught me the greatest lesson I learned in working with the administration and working in student government. And that is the concept of viewpoint neutrality. This organization that was really utilizing hateful rhetoric wanted to acquire funding to attend an event. And a branch of student government acted quite with post haste and completely denied them funding. Now, this was really an egregious act in regards to the legal aspect that could have resulted in a lawsuit against the student government. And it was a very difficult decision for us, but we essentially reached out to that organization, brought them back to the table, and acquired them funding because that is the law. And did I personally, gain from that experience? Absolutely. I completely disagree with their ideology, their form of activism, but I recognize the greater ramifications of not funding that organization, in which a lawsuit will result in complete student government dissolution, in which multiple communities of color, multiple marginalized communities would be affected. And it was painful. It was frustrating. The sentiment of the student body was very clear. They felt, betrayed. The pain was very real. It was very palpable. It was very pure. And at times it felt like we were capitulating to this organization that was utilizing this hateful rhetoric. It really did. And as student leaders, we didn't know how to proceed from there. And then we realized that the communities that the organization was targeting had amazing accomplishments. They had amazing voices. We could uplift and promote those voices, uplift and promote those accomplishments. And we could hear those voices. So that was like the greatest lesson that I learned as serving as in the administration and serving as a student leader, is hearing all voices and trying to uplift a community and tie it with the principles of community that Kamya really painted and illustrated quite clearly, and bringing it back to the table. So I would imagine that the greatest lesson was hearing all voices and knowing all potential ramifications before acting. So that was really the greatest lesson I learned. Thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's sort of authenticity about the struggle, because I think that's a big part of speech. I mean, I do this every day and there's a lot of struggle. So of course, now we're going to turn to the administrator on the panel. Latrice, I would love for you to share your perspective of, what is it like working with students, especially student activists, especially in these sort of high emotion, controversial moments?
Well, I would say it's definitely one of those things that pushes and pulls you in so many directions. I think ultimately our experiences as administrators are both incredibly difficult and also inspiring. I think when these things have happened, oftentimes we are the front line really helping our students navigate the hurt and the anger, their feelings of being targeted, and knowing that this is so difficult, that this ties into so much for them, not beyond just their educational experience. And I think even though we know intellectually that a person or a group has the right to say things that are hurtful or even hateful as they push their positions forward, how those statements land in our spirits is very, very different. And helping our students navigate that and navigating with them is challenging. We know that the speech is oftentimes, as has been said already, in direct opposition to the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion that we hold as an institution, but also as we hold individually. And so when these things happen, it is profound for the students, but for our larger community, for our staff and our faculty. No one escapes this. And so I personally have felt challenged. I have spent a lot of pretty sleepless nights thinking about how we uphold our values and how we support our students, all students, as they put forward their speech and bring forward those issues and beliefs that they really want to think about and to dialogue about. I do think, though, that these situations can be incredibly inspirational at the end of the day, because what we have seen, what I have seen, is that these challenges have pushed our students in ways that were unexpected and allowed them to find resilience, to find and make connections that when their beliefs are being challenged, their values and even their identities are being tested, that we've really watched our students mobilize and that they've come together to organize. They've used their voices to stand up for themselves and for others. Being out on Scholars Lane and watching this happen every day, being in meetings behind the scenes and watching the students realize that we have power, that we have agency, that we have voice, and that we can make change has been so positive. ASUCM has passed resolutions. We watched and worked with groups as they connected with administration to implement new programs and to advocate for more space and more resources. We've seen our groups come together to create mentorships and outreach programs that empower student voice and increase the recognition and the celebration that we have on our campus and within our community. And so watching our students really find their voice and their strength and power, and to know that they have the will and the agency to make things happen. And sometimes in the face of difficult speech, to be that bell, that voice ringing loud and true with the things that really matter to them, and that matter to the university in support of our values is really powerful. It's been really an incredible experience. As difficult as it can be, it is truly inspirational.
Well, that is beautiful. And clearly I've been so moved by what you're saying that I made a moderator misstep, which is that I passed over Melissa. So I'm going to go take a step back and let Melissa talk about also her experiences as sort of the dual life of activist and, administrator.
Yeah, so, when I think about prior to working with administration and on free speech matters, I would say what surprises me the most is the level of emotional intensity that these free speech issues also have on administrators and staff, as well as the students themselves, and the level of complexity around them. I actually was kind of critical when we first had Milo Yiannopoulos come to our campus and didn't think there was enough of a response, and wrote a polite but negative, concerned letter to our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs. And she really invited me in and was like, let's have a conversation about this. And I think that goes a really long way when administrators, instead of automatically having a defense, instead want to hear from students who maybe have perspectives they want to share. And so for me, I just want to put it out there, my activist roots, that's kind of where I came to some of this work. And so I thought what would be interesting is to just share a quick example of when I most felt kind of that tension or opportunity of kind of being in both worlds. And so really with the COLA, cost of living adjustment strikes that we had in the UC system, grad students trying to get better pay for their work, right? And so at UC Santa Barbara, we had one of the most active campuses right behind or along with UC Berkeley. And so one of the main things was I was working with the COLA activists, and they wanted to potentially shut down the freeway. I was encouraging them to maybe do a sit-in in the chancellor's office. There were a couple other students who were also kind of thinking about safety and encouraging a sit-in. So at the sit-in, which ended up happening, the students wanted to occupy the chancellor's office till midnight in solidarity with UC Santa Cruz students who had a deadline of having to submit the student grades they were holding hostage by midnight or face major repercussions. And so during that sit-in, I knew the Grad Student Association president, who was kind of the leader for the COLA movement at that time, and also kind of the leader in the sit-in. And what surprised me most was at one moment we had the administrators in the vice chancellor's office working with students. And then we had the students so anyway, we had the Vice Chancellor Student Association. And so it was a tension where the students who were occupying didn't want administrators to come in the room. And so there was this challenge to communicate, and the student leader at one point said, Melissa, I'm just so afraid that when the building closes at 5 o'clock, the police are going to come in and arrest us and drag us out of the building. And we have Sharpies, and we're going to put emergency contact numbers on our arms just in case the police confiscate our cell phones. And I had no idea there was that level of fear and concern and emotion that the student was holding on to. And so I sent a text to one of the administrators and let her know that there were some real questions, and eventually the administrators were more welcomed into the room and were able to dialogue with the students and reassure them that there was no intention to bring any police in or arrests. And eventually our vice chancellor sat down and had soup with students, which Food Not Bombs delivered, and really was able to show some solidarity in the way that she could with the students. And so for me, I think it's a matter of trying to gain trust of both the administration and trust of student activists to the extent that you can, but that doesn't work with everyone. It's interpersonal relationships. Some students definitely saw me as a sellout. They have told me that to my face at times. So different student groups, I have different relationships with, and I think it's just a matter of navigating those roles and being honest sometimes and just saying, I'm here in my role as a student activist, I'm not on the clock, that's not what I'm doing here. And other times being honest and saying, well, as a student employee and someone who's representing the university to a certain extent, this is what I think and feel or can say in this moment. And so I think the more we can just ground it in honesty, I think is the way to go.
Oh, thank you. We, when we prepped for this panel, we had a lot of discussions about intentions and intentionality, and, how does one come, to a situation or to the table, thinking the others have the best of intentions. I know that's a challenge for me, that I'm not always assuming best intentions, and I know that I can do a better job of doing that, and that is so hard. So one of the things that I'm excited about this panel is I really get frustrated when people lay out a lot of problems and then the panel ends. And so I feel like what we really took time to structure is to say, there's a lot of challenges and we're going to share with you some of them, but now we're going to share with you some effective methods for working through those challenges. So that's what we're going to turn to now. And I think I'm going to go ahead and ask Jason to kind of share with us what happened in that really challenging situation you discussed in the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there was that overall feeling of frustration that we've let down our fellow students, our peers, folks that we look up to on a day-to-day basis, and we realized that we really needed to hear their voices. So we really organized healing circles after the decision was made to fund that particular organization, because it was very important that not only did we hear the concerns in the wind, it's important to sit down and listen in the exact same room and really validate their concerns, really validate the trials and tribulations that they were facing, because it was a form of ostracization. And that silence that preluded that, it was very overwhelming. It was like a blanket, and we really wanted to overcome that. We really wanted to invite a space where folks could speak freely, could speak their minds, and be really honest and transparent with the student government, to draft potential resolutions that would promote collaboration with our marginalized communities of color. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to hear the various accomplishments they've made, not only in that particular year, but through their duration at UC Merced. It was really a summarization, not of one moment, but of a whole journey. And we really wanted to portray that journey of those marginalized communities on campus. So that was a really pivotal moment. And it was really just a declaration of support. So I was really grateful to work with those student leaders and with our student government and with our faculty and administrative members who really worked in unison with those healing circles.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a quick follow-up, which is, you talked about how you had this experience where there was some lessons that were learned for you. And I'm curious if you felt like other people in the community also sort of got a greater understanding of why the First Amendment works the way it does, or whether people were sort of left unsatisfied in that regard.
Now that's an excellent question. And if I will be completely honest, it was a mixed reaction. I feel like there was folks who said, oh, I see. Obviously funding must be distributed equally. All funds come from every single student, and we could use our voices to uplift communities. And then other students were like, this is wrong. This is not the folks that we elected. They need to be completely on our side. And I think those were the folks that we really needed to reach out most to and validate their concerns and hear what they experienced during that time. So I definitely think there was a lot more room to improve those types of healing circles, and perhaps have an opportunity to collaborate with additional clubs and communities, which really leads me to the whole concept of the pandemic, where I've noticed that clubs and organizations that did not originally collaborate have done so in the face of a pandemic. So it was a really wonderful experience. For example, we have a lot of fantastic tech orgs and a lot of cultural orgs, and they married the advent of technology to promote each other. So it was a wonderful concept of community. But yes, thank you for that phenomenal question.
Thank you. We're going to get to sort of some thoughts about kind of this past online year. But before we get there, I'm going to ask Latrice if she could share some of the things that she thought has been effective, in your time at Merced in terms of responding to these hard moments.
So, and I really agree with Jason that, sometimes the responses, no matter how much you try, it may leave some folks wanting. But during the situation that we encountered back during that election period, one of the things that stuck with me is that when things settled down on campus, we were still processing so much. And some of these issues really took months to resolve as follow-up was happening in various locations throughout the community with students and others. I think some of the positives that I've seen have really been kind of a mixed method type approach to ensure that students have time and access to administrators to share their thoughts and their feelings and to really talk about how that they've been impacted and to express their needs in those moments, and really sometimes even their demands when these situations have occurred. I think one of the things that I so appreciate is the fact that our administrators have been very, very open to communicating and to getting feedback from our students. And what we realize is that the more feedback that we get from students, it's about their agency, and it's not just about the university coming in and making a choice that we are going to do this thing in this moment, but to hear what the students need. So while the university will often provide a public statement that reaffirms our values and potentially denounces, behaviors that have been exhibited if that's appropriate, getting the feedback from the students and what they need is really critical. And then supporting those student needs. Sometimes we will hear that the students want the university to do a certain thing. And other times they just want us to stand back and support them while they take the forward position and really assert themselves and stand up to the issues being presented. A few of the things that we have done is the administration has worked with ASUCM to gather feedback, to get messaging out, to determine what would be best approaches. And we worked with other student organizations that have been impacted to do the same. As was mentioned, we offered healing circles, some of those staff facilitated, some student-led circles, again, depending on what the students need. We have partnered with our faculty to offer town halls where there were both faculty and student panelists to talk about the history of the particular issue and the evolution of those issues. In this situation, as I'm talking about it being election season, hosting candidate debates and information sessions on the propositions to provide clarity around some issues. Freedom of speech workshops have been hosted, and then also providing information to students to provide empowerment around demonstrating and protesting, helping students understand what it means to be on a public campus. And, the example that Kamiar talked about with folks coming onto campus with a message that was really startling and impactful in many negative ways for our students, helping our students understand what it means to be a public university and that the public can come onto the campus and share their messages. And that we also help students who want to respond understand what they can do. So if you want to provide a counter protest, how do you do that in a safe manner that follows university policies, or understand what it means if you, choose to do things that that could violate university policy or put you in a challenging position. So helping students talk through those things. We've met with lots of groups that wanted to protest so that they can really talk through those things and help them clarify what is their purpose, what are they trying to do, what is their ultimate goal of moving forward. And then also helping students understand that that there are many ways to show up, that there are many ways to protest and to be present. It may not be safe in all situations for everyone to stand out with a sign or to identify themselves in a certain way. So how do we help students understand that there are things that you can do behind the scenes to support an issue if it doesn't feel okay, or if it doesn't feel safe for you to be present in certain ways, and also to help educate our students about the fact that people have to be able to choose how they show up in that moment. It doesn't mean that they don't support the issues, but really just to help open the dialogue and to provide some information and education about what it means to protest and demonstrate and what advocacy can look like, and to clarify the goals of what you're doing when you step forward to address these speech issues. So those have been a few of the ways that we have really tried to support our students and address some of the issues that have come up. Also, as we hear from our larger Merced community and depending on the issues from folks around the country, really trying to help students understand that even though it's happening on our campus, it is much bigger sometimes. And so that there are lots of things that are being done sometimes behind the scenes to address these issues, even as it relates to student conduct because of FERPA and some things. Sometimes students don't think that issues are being addressed, and they are, but information may not always be able to be shared as openly because there may be legal restrictions on that information.
Thank you. That's such a robust answer. Melissa, I know that at Santa Barbara, you've done a lot of amazing and effective things to combat ugly speech. So maybe you could share some of the ones you feel like have been most impactful.
Yeah, I don't want to be obnoxious and be like, read the book and shout out to my toolkit, but it is free, and it is the Free Speech Center online, because I went into a lot of detail about how we responded at UCSB to a lot of these incidents, like the Ben Shapiro event. So I don't want to be remiss and only highlight one of many things, but the one that I personally was the most involved with or found the most meaningful was when we brought Tim Weiss to come and speak at our big lecture hall. And we only had 3 weeks to plan it because I happened to get an email from his speaking bureau, Speak Out, saying he's going to be in Southern California for half the speaker's fee. You can have him. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I just thought, not that I'm the hugest Tim Weiss fan in the world, actually, I just thought he was the right speaker for our campus at that moment, to have someone who was white that would talk about anti-racism work, and to be able to kind of, in a way, I don't want to say respond to Ben Shapiro coming, because it wasn't like that, but have a voice of someone who is engaged in anti-racism advocacy. And so that was something I thought was really meaningful for me. And the student I mentioned at the very beginning for your first question from the Black Student Union was the student I organized that with, along with a staff member from our associate students, and he also was a grad student at the time. So I feel like in some ways, when I've talked to other administrators, they've said that worked out really well because two of you were grad students and working with the administration and able to in some ways support the undergraduate student in a way that protected her a little, because there was just such a bad climate or hostility coming from the college Republicans. And so that was just one thing we did. Just real fast, EOP undergrad peer workers also organized an event called Yes We Can, Cultural Appreciation Night, that was held the same night as the Ben Shapiro event. So there was an alternative event students could attend, celebration of our cultural resource centers, food, games, music, crafts, arts. It was like a totally popular event. To be honest, maybe wouldn't have ever happened without people coming together and having this idea of doing something that would make people feel a positive sense of community. And so, you know, that was one positive, but I'll just leave it at that.
No, I like that we can still think of some silver linings that come out of bad things. I know this is something I've been trying to do during this whole time. Kamyar, love to hear from you.
Sure. So when another outside group came to campus, they were sharing really archaic and just damaging views about women, about people's sexualities. And they were overall just preaching extremely stylized conservative views on campus. And they had belonged to an organization where they would travel to campuses, get a reaction, film it, post it to YouTube, and then make money off of it. This was literally their job. And so when they visited UC Merced, they conducted themselves in this way, lawfully, sure, although very offensively, for several days. And each day they drew crowds that would seem to be over 100 students, and I was present at some point as well. And so for several hours each day, we staged counter demonstrations, tried to engage them in dialogue. Some students even almost comically lit sage to try to banish them and their evil energy. So we were dedicating a lot of time to counter demonstrations. And so these folks, you know, they came to campus, you know, one time for a period of a few days. But what if our campus was similar to UC Berkeley, where various demonstrations occur on a weekly or even daily basis? I think the student mobilization that Latrice mentioned earlier can be very effective when we choose to engage. But speaking more so to students here, I ask, at what point do we say that our efforts are futile, falling on deaf ears, and we need to make a decision, an individual decision to ignore certain speech? Do we take 2 hours out of each day where we can be studying, taking care of ourselves, working, to give mean-spirited people content for their YouTube channel so that they can monetize off of our pain? Or do we keep in mind that sometimes outside agitators, who are just that, agitators who come to agitate, they bring a certain intention with them, and we need to make decisions accordingly as far as how much we put into our response. And again, I think this is an extremely personal decision that's up to each student. And I've learned for myself that sometimes people have unmoving intentions. They're beyond dialogue or an exchange of ideas. They want to cause harm or at least controversy, and they're protected by free speech laws. And so they're not subject to discipline or removal from campus by the administration. And me personally, I'm okay with making the choice to not let them have that power over me. And I would choose not to engage and give them the attention they want, based on who they are and why they're on campus. It might be different if they're your classmates, but outside agitators, typically, I don't like to give them the attention that they're craving and want to monetize off of.
I think those are a couple really important points. One is, I think one of the things that's been highlighted tonight is this idea that the law is a really blunt instrument, right? And that we can only do a certain number of things by using the law, which, you know, as a lawyer, I have had to come to terms with, you know, that it isn't going to fix, the First Amendment isn't going to fix things. It's not going to get us where we want to be. It's a tool, but it's not an end in of itself. And the other piece, you know, Kamyar, that I think you put so well is that I think sometimes we forget that the right to speak also includes the right not to speak, right? The choice to like walk away or to disengage or to choose not to respond. And that can be just as, you know, empowering or impactful. So, I mean, we have more questions, but I was thinking if it's okay with Onar and others, I was thinking it might be nice to open up the chat to see if people have questions now, if that works. And while we're giving folks an opportunity to think about questions and put them into the chat, we'll just start on another element that I wanted to have you focus on, which is this, like, a lot of what we've talked about is what it was like when we were all in person, right? And I've spent a lot of time this year thinking, what would this year have been like if we'd all been on campus, you know, post George Floyd, post January 6th. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to just talk to whether you think how this year has been for speech challenges being online, you know, whether it's, you know, helped build committee discourse and community, whether it's not helped. So does someone want to go ahead and start with that while I watch the Q&A? Kamiar, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
I think one thing that comes to mind, it's one of the key elements that I was very hopeful about and found solace in at UC Merced, particularly when we were faced with these free speech challenges, was knowing the values and the heart of the community, of the students, the staff, faculty, and knowing that whatever offensive speech was being shared in that moment was not the norm, but the anomaly in our community. And so I think the challenge in the age of COVID and virtual learning is how much community has actually been built amongst students, how much community has been built amongst students and administrators in order for incoming students, our incoming generation of students, to really have this element of hope and understanding that I was very privileged to have at my time in person at UC Merced. Brene Brown says that faith is a place of mystery, and I've uncovered over the years that part of that place of mystery for my faith in humanity, my faith in decency and wellness, comes from the people around me. And so knowing we have administrators, educators, and students here with us today, I really want to challenge everyone to take whatever virtual community building that's been happening presently and really take it one step further, just so that our younger generation doesn't lose that hope in face of free speech challenges.
Thank you. That was so well said. Before I go to someone else, I also want to just offer the participants that, you know, we want to hear questions, but also if you have had an experience or found something that was effective in responding to one of these challenges, I think I can speak for all the panelists that we would be interested in hearing it. I mean, I think this is about an exchange of ideas. The panelists have had some experiences that we want to share, but that we want to learn also from you. Would someone else like to talk about sort of online? Jason, do you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. So as a student on campus, the whole online approach was really foreign to me at first. And I was really hesitant about it. I was like, oh, this is not going to be the same. I'm not going to have that human connection. But it's these types of events with the administration that has really, like, it has broken down that stigmatization that administration is this big bureaucracy, this big wall that is insurmountable. But it's this type of engagement with our administration, with our faculty members, that's really broken down that wall, that it's allowed our students to, you know, elevate our voices and to mobilize around really common themes. So, you know, when we talk about adversity, when we face adversity in our communities, it's really heartening to see technology be utilized as an apparatus to overcome that adversity. And a really beautiful example is the African Student Union is doing a phenomenal cultural show, their 10th annual one on Saturday. And they're including different cultural organizations within their cultural show. This is a practice they've been doing every single year. But through the advent of technology, they could also include different video submissions. For example, they included a video submission from an organization in Nigeria, Chess in Slums, whose focus is to teach children in Nigeria chess maneuvers, but also fostering that love of learning. So through the advent of technology, we could definitely build and foster community and really have really enlightened discourse.
Great. Melissa, Latrice.
So I think that one of the things that that I've seen it kind of in the world of student conduct, student rights and responsibilities during this time, this COVID period where we've been, primarily online, is that there has been an increase in the kinds of challenging speech, really emboldened speech, a little bit of cyberbullying and piling on. Sometimes you'll see shaming, and then that sense of cancel culture. And we have seen a little bit of that in individually, student to student, but sometimes within a group as well. And it's just showing that even in a space where you don't see each other all the time, there's those kind of personal conflicts that come up. Sometimes they start off with a political issue, or with politics or a political issue, but then they really turn personal really quickly. And so when students reach out to us, or when we become aware, we've really tried to reach out and help students understand what their options are in terms of response or choosing not to respond, how they can report, and helping provide access to resources, support resources and information, and really helping keeping the door open for students, that while a situation may have settled down, sometimes these things can escalate quickly. And so the ability to continue reaching out and letting students know that we remain here, that we are here, to help respond and support and help them figure out how to address needs, or if we need to provide intervention, that we can do that too. But on a positive note, I think one of the things that we've seen also is really the ability for our students to self-regulate and to engage. Sometimes we will be notified about a situation where someone is being bullied online, or communications around an issue, the speech has gotten really hostile or really detrimental. And I think that we have to hold back a little bit sometimes and look at what is happening. And oftentimes I've been really heartened to see that our students will step in, they are stepping up as essentially virtual bystanders, that they are providing lists of campus resources, community resources, that instead of tearing down the person who might have made the comments or who might have been piling on, they are providing messages of support and positivity to the impacted individual or group, and letting them know that they're not alone, that they have support, and that they stand with them and by them, and that there is an entire community that stands with them. And so in a time where our rhetoric has been so challenging over the last few years, and certainly during this time where we're primarily online, it's been fantastic to see our students really stepping up to support one another in the virtual space. Very positive.
That's nice to hear positive things. And I just want to pick up on something that you said, Latrice, about self-regulation. A lot of people talk about self-censorship, and one of our former fellows, Carlos, sort of said to me, self-censorship isn't always bad, right? And I just think one of the things that I also think is worth thinking about is this idea of rights versus responsibilities when it comes to speech, that we may have the right to say a lot of different things, but that doesn't make it the most responsible, thoughtful, humanistic thing to do. And that self-regulation it is a piece of that, right? So I know we need to come to Melissa, but there's a question. Can I go to that? Okay. Or Melissa, how about this? Melissa, you share your answer about online, and then Nella, do you feel comfortable coming on audio and reading your question after Melissa's done? We'd love to hear your voice.
Sure.
Okay, Melissa, go ahead, and then we'll turn it to Nella.
I haven't worked for student affairs since July, so I feel a little out of the loop of like what's going on campus in terms of social media and free speech and that. I will just more so say, thinking at the national landscape around speech, the insurrection at the Capitol, the presidential election, everything going on, like I'm just seeing such a heightened kind of intensity and emotion around a lot of online speech, even my own Facebook threads of COVID and reopening of schools and like, you know, staff who normally I don't see going at it, but even, you know, mothers like over Facebook. So like, I think that there is just so much emotion right now that's something that I'm thinking about a lot in terms of like Latrice mentioning cancel culture and some of those aspects. And, you know, thinking we have someone in the cabinet that on the news last night, they said President Biden might have a challenge getting her approved on the cabinet because she had once tweeted out Mitch McConnell is Voldemort. And if you don't know, Voldemort was the evil character in the Harry Potter series, right? And so this is a comment she had made a while ago before she knew she was going to get tapped to maybe be in the cabinet, right? So it becomes like, are we going to hold someone accountable for that? That sounds like very kind of personal speech to me, but that just brings up an issue. Or there's some other things I can think of around reopening in schools that I've seen that just really are making me think a lot about free speech and the boundaries between personal voices and your professional voice or your professional job related aspects. And so that's just one thing that is on my mind currently.
No, I think that's really important. And I think, you know, after we get to Nella's question, we might come back to this question of, I wonder if there's room for people to make mistakes now in discourse. You know, look, there's some people that come to the table, like Kamiar said, or Jason said, their minds aren't going to be changed and they're intractable. But I think there are people that come to the table who really are trying to learn, but I don't know that it's necessarily a very safe space to ask questions and to try to learn. You know, I know this is what I do, right? As I deal with free speech. And there are times when I'm a little embarrassed to say, like, I think to myself, you know, I think I'm not going to ask that right now. I'm going to call that person separately because like, what if somebody misinterprets it, right? And I feel like if I'm thinking that, what are other people thinking? Okay, the delightful Nella, would you like to read your question? And then I'll let the panelists speak to it. Either panelists, or I also think if it's okay, you know, anybody on the DEI office who wants to speak to it, because it's a big question.
Yeah, it took up a lot of space in the chat there. I apologize. No, well, first, thank you all so much. This is super interesting. And I'm so happy that you're all here and took the time to be here with us. And I'm just feel lucky to be able to attend this event. Thank you so much. And gosh, I so agree with you in terms of it's so alarming what's going on kind of, you know, in the broader culture in terms of the vitriol and the polarization and the emotion, the intensity that it's no wonder we're seeing more of that on our campuses, right? And part of me is thinking, surely there's a way that we can be part of the answer here, that we can try to help make things better, both on our campuses and in the broader culture. And so my question was, you know, you've identified a lot of efforts that were made, and it sounds like, you know, really excellent approaches to handling the conflict when it happened. But I'm wondering about what are some kind of things we can do long-term to educate students about free speech, options they have for advocacy, and even somehow to try to encourage dialogue and more trust and civility in that dialogue. So I'm kind of wondering, so our Free Speech Week is a fantastic addition to our culture at UC Merced, but I'm wondering what other sorts of long-term things can we do? And Latrice, and some of you have talked about some of these things, but I'm just wondering about some of your other thoughts. Thank you.
So one thing that I would say, and I'll keep it brief and let others hop in, is that we need to think about how we educate in an ongoing way, that we have new students coming in every year. We have new students coming in the spring term that are new to the campus, and whether they're coming from their high school or their community college, you know, or other life experiences, the environment that we want to create on our campus has to be reinforced every year at the beginning, starting with orientation, the messaging that comes from us as an administration, and it needs to come from all pockets of the campus to let folks know about what we value in terms of speech, the things that we hold dear and true, and to know that we're going to make mistakes. All of us will, that we're all fallible, and there's space for that, that the university has to be safe, a safe space to ask questions and learn and grow. And it can't just be polarized. And I think that we have to do that and reinforce that message in every space, from the first day of class, in the orientation, in our policies, in our programs. It has to be a collective effort in everything that we can think of, just like we're talking about and thinking about our EDI work, and that it is the responsibility of all. We have to think about that approach around speech, because it is that thing that you can't get away from. You hear speech in the lantern, you hear it on Scholars Lane, in the classroom. There are a million spaces a day where there could be push and pull and challenge and space for offense. And so we have to learn how to dialogue and to make it safe for dialogue, but reinforcing our values and our beliefs, and how we value our community members at every turn.
Thank you. I did want to quickly mention that Nella is a member of the Center's Academic Advisory Board, so we're very proud and appreciative of that. I don't know if other panelists want to add something. Other panelists, and then, okay, Kamyar.
Sure, so I'll just add my 2 cents from a student perspective. First, Professor Van Dyke, it's so good to hear from you. Thank you for the question. I think from a student perspective, when we were having these moments, these chaotic moments of free speech challenges on campus, I think to a certain extent there was an expectation from students that the administration would do something strong, kick them off campus, tell them they can't do that, take a very strong stance. Oh, well, don't we have principles of communities and this goes against that? Do something, do something. It was a lot of that. So I think part of the preventative solutions for it to get so chaotic and really hurtful from a student perspective is really communicating these clear, concise, expectations of what the university and administrators can do. I don't recall from my student handbook any conversations around free speech and what the administration would do if speech is offensive. I don't remember it during orientation per se, although that was a long time ago. I'm getting older. But I know we do have some mandatory trainings on campus for first years. How seriously do we want to take this issue, and do we make free speech concerns a mandatory introduction to the university? Otherwise, what does that mean for us in terms of educating students on what is to be expected of administrators? I also think in terms of the dialogue, and you mentioned lack of trust, and I love sociology. Definitely, I think on a large scale, there's a lot of lack of trust. But and like Latrice was saying, so many different places for offensive speech to occur. I think part of the free speech communication that we have students when they enter campus is what does productive dialogue look like, and how to communicate with intention. That therefore students can, keep in mind that if another student is acting in bad faith, law school here, I always read about good faith, bad faith. If someone truly is acting in bad faith, knowing when to pull away from that conversation. I think all of these just expectations and what to do needs to be communicated strongly when students enter the university for a long-term solution, or at least part of it.
Speaking of dialogues, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if people are comfortable, I'd love for Onar or someone else to share about your upcoming dialogue program that you're going to be planning, because I think it really speaks to some of the issues, and then I'll circle back to Melissa and Jason.
Yeah, great. So this is the exciting news, right, from the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. But Michelle is the executive director, and I see Brenda. Thank you so much, who's been a great help during the trip last year. So just shout out. So we did get approved for Dialogues That Matter, right? So the great team in the equity, diversity, and inclusion. Basically, the premise of the Dialogues That Matter is to explore emerging issues impacting the campus, local, national, and global communities by inviting guest speakers to address topics, engages the UC Merced and the Merced community. And Dialogues That Matter will operate in a workshop setting to provide our campus community members with tools necessary to navigate difficult conversations, right? So we have offered, right, deep dives, town halls, radical healing series, and to continue this, and again, having the opportunity to get some funding will just enhance what we are already doing and the exciting thing that we are offering. So we're excited to get that funding from the center, and we will be planning those in the fall. So it's exciting that, you know, there's that currency with the to provide some resources for what we're doing at UC Merced. So it's, again, part of it. And this is what our fearless leader always says, right? Like that we want to leave this place a better place, which makes me a better individual and a very engaged community member and a change agent. So that's it's coming up. And so if you all are wanting to be part of that, I'm sure that we would love to create another committee to help us engage in that work.
And maybe
Paula, did you want?
Oh, thanks, Sonar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just was gonna add, you know, kind of to your point, Kamyar, about like establishing these conversations on our campus strategically, right? And not just part of why we develop Dialogues That Matter is things take place on our campus or nationwide, and then we're all scrambling and looking at each other like, okay, we need to get an event, you know, we need to address this somehow, and instead having those set up so that as soon as something takes place, we've got a date, we've got an event, we've got a title. We just have to secure the speaker. We just have to figure out how we're going to address it. And so I think that's the key here, is figuring out structurally, how do we create space for these conversations rather than only having them as a reaction when something happens. Right. And so we're super excited to get that started and then continue it so that we're not scrambling when things happen on that national context.
And just to add the power of three, so the reason we conceptualize it as Dialogues That Matter versus difficult dialogues, which you've heard a lot in this work, is that creates already an adversarial positioning of it. So when you think about it, and if you lead with love and you lead with your values, what you're really talking about are conversations that really matter to the people involved. And so our Dialogues That Matter are going to start with an anti-series. So combating anti-Semitism, being anti-racist, you know, all these things that automatically kind of position people on other sides of it. But when you get to the crux of it matters, you realize that there's a lot more alignment than difference. And so that's why we didn't want to go with the difficult dialogues or all that places. And unlike our 1 hour virtual dialogues that are always packed, it's 2 hours to leave people as transformative practitioners, because that's where I think the real change comes, Professor Van Dyke. We often hear from students, if my faculty member doesn't mention it in class, it doesn't matter to them. So in a way, silence is participation. So how do we counteract that and create the tools for people to walk away with, think, you know, oh, I heard a great speech, but I heard a great speech, I heard these great panelists, and I have a list of things I can do and how to engage with this afterwards. So we're all about those takeaways, that goodie bag. That's the EDI swag that you can take with you. And the EDI swag is for you to go out there and continue to change the world.
And I think to add one last point to that is we have so many things already happening on our campus organically. As we heard from Kamyar and Latrice and Jason, like our students, our faculty, our staff are engaged. They're having these conversations amongst one another. And so through establishing these Dialogues That Matter, we're now creating a space so that they have not only those conversations happening structurally, but then the tools are being provided for them rather than them having to seek it out themselves as they already have been.
I was just going to add, I mean, of course, I think it's a great idea. That's clear. But also this idea, I know for me, I'm not a huge social media person because I'm really into getting into the nuance of things. And that's why we've had an hour and a half tonight. And you're going to give people 2 hours. You know, in 160 or 200 characters, I think it's basically impossible to really discuss these issues. There literally isn't the space for that. And I think that we're creating a culture where not only is there not the space, but people no longer have the patience for it. Like if they can't quickly look at it and understand it, then it's not valuable. And I really think that these kinds of more in-depth conversations can really counter that. Okay, Melissa, I know you had some things you wanted to add, and Jason, I want to make sure I don't leave you out.
I'll just be real quick here in answering Nella's question and also maybe providing a resource or some info for folks at UC Merced to know in case maybe it's something you're already doing, I don't know, but on our campus, it's been really helpful having what we call a campus community council that our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and Dean of Students, Katja Armistead, do together, and they created it. And they actually had tuned in earlier to our talk tonight. And so if any of the folks at UC Merced were ever interested in asking them, it's to kind of get a more proactive approach instead of being reactive, which I think is part of what Nella was speaking to in terms of bringing together administrators, some student leaders, police, like different folks to talk about eyes and ears on the ground of what they've heard coming up, but also what can we just do year round all the time, thinking about campus climate and campus climate in relation to speech and other matters. And so that's something that our campus modeled after UC Davis. And so I don't know, maybe you have something similar at Merced, but if you don't, it's something I know some of the UCs have been interested in. And then the other thing is Katja Armistead also created a freedom of expression workshop that I believe is like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And she actually traveled to UC Santa Cruz to lead them, the student affairs administrators, through her freedom of expression workshop, and they loved it, and now they do it. So I always say we're a system, right? We're family, the UC system family. Like the more we can just perhaps adopt and tweak things that other campuses are already doing to fit our own community, I think that's win-win for everybody. So I know Katja already has shared these resources. So if that is something of interest. And just lastly, as a student, I love nothing more than when you have more informal gatherings of like tables. And I know we can't do this right now, or we could virtual, it's just harder, but like tables of administrators and students together having conversations, whether it's free speech or anything. I don't care if people are sharing pets on their phone. The more that you have students get access to administrators and staff and meet them as people, have shared humanity, conversation, community, I think the more we break down these assumptions of, you know, that's the big boss, right? Or like thinking, oh, those students have access to those administrators and I don't. Do I not have the social capital? Like, what is it that's going on that those students are close and I'm not? And so I think the more we create informal spaces, the better. So I've just got to put that out there.
No, that's great. So I'm going to let Jason have kind of the final word, and then I'll kind of quickly wrap up and turn it back over to Maria. The time, you know, what do they say? Time flies when you're having fun.
Thank you so much. No pressure, right? But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's extremely fundamental to have like that standardized approach to having these various different programs because, and we discussed this during our previous sessions, is that a lot of the students, you know, myself included, when we go to college, it's a whole new world. It's a cultural shock. And it's like, how do we navigate those waters? And there was like a little bit of trepidation when approaching faculty members who, you know, are sometimes larger than life. But with these various programs, it really destigmatizes that whole, you know, nuance of, oh, this is, I think you all mentioned like the big boss, you know, I'm not privileged enough to like, you know, approach this individual. It really humanizes these conversations because at the end of the day, I feel, you know, like a concept that I'm sure all of us has experienced, especially during these past years, is fatigue. It's, you know, it's exhaustion. And having the opportunity to just chat with a faculty member, to bond over something, you know, a movie, a book, someday a cup of coffee in a very close context, perhaps, maybe not recently, but that's really exciting to hear. And I'll be really honest, I've been here for almost 4 years, and the conversations I've had with faculty members have been cordial, they've been warm, And I've really felt I was directed to the appropriate resources during the times of need. So I think definitely fostering that standardized approach that all of my fellow panelists mentioned, and really having that centralized location of resources that is accessible is extremely crucial and critical.
Well, I think you've said it well. I think it's, I didn't have a chance to say it at the beginning, but I know the panelists have heard me talk about this. I feel like, Jason, you really hit on something, which is that I think sometimes we forget how different K through 12 is with speech. And when you get to a public campus, I mean, as a parent of 2 young kids, I feel like I'm constantly talking about the power of words and words that we don't use and weighing our words, right? And speaking up when we hear words that, are hurtful or harmful, but if you don't pair that with some civic literacy and some understanding of why we might protect ugly speech in certain situations, and then you drop off 18-year-olds to a public campus and say anything goes, part of me feels like, why are we surprised that they're upset? We haven't given them all the tools. We've given them the anti-bias piece, which is so important, but if you don't pair that with the other piece, of course they're going to be outraged. They're not snowflakes, they're horrified, because this goes against everything that they've had inculcated K through 12. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox. I want to thank our panelists for being so thoughtful, so authentic, so honest, so real. I want to thank the whole Danya and her whole team. So looking forward to working together more. I always want to thank Brenda, and she's there. And then I think I'll also turn it back to Maria, who is gonna spin the wheel or do something fun. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you all to all of our panelists for that fantastic and really insightful conversation and discussion. I feel like there's so much food for thought there. My mom even came in at a point and was listening to the conversation, which is really fun because she's learning English. So parts of it she would ask, what are they saying? So I got to share that a little bit. So thank you so much for, crossing the information boundary to our families as well, which is a benefit of the virtual learning space I found. But thank you all so much for the wonderful panel presentation today. And now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we'll conduct the final book giveaway of our Free Speech Week. And in the spirit of complete transparency, there was a slight hiccup if you joined us in the last session, and there was actually 2 previous winners that had been selected by accident because I forgot to remove them from the list. So we get to select 7 winners in this session, as opposed to just 5. So 7 lucky people will be picked to win an ebook version. And I have confirmed and double checked that everybody who has won before is not included in the list. So only people who haven't won and aren't speakers and aren't part of my team are on this. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and spin the wheel. It'll spin 7 times, and we'll pick some lucky winners to win ebook copies of Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. Congratulations, Shuma. I'll go ahead and hit it again. And Isabel Wilkerson was just a winner of the Pulitzer Prize in this fantastic book. I think it's landed on name. Oh, did it land on the name twice? I'm telling you, I'll run it 6 more times. What are the odds, right, that it'll land on the same name twice? That's some fantastic luck there.
She should run to Vegas, or he should run to Vegas.
Yeah. Okay, so we have our second winner, Brenda. Congratulations. Have her third one.
Okay. Oh, I think Brenda wants to give an acceptance speech. Is that it?
I got excited.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see it spin and nice ending. Karen, congrats.
Karen's been with us all week.
Right? I know.
I'm so happy. Right? I am so happy.
Yay!
Yeah.
Brenda again?
I'm telling you, sometimes it happens. Okay, so we have 3 winners that have been selected so far. I will win it. I will spin it until we get 7 individual winners, multiple names. Ashley, Somerset, congratulations.
Ashley, yeah.
Kim. Yes, Kim, awesome.
No pressure, but maybe we should host a book club for all the winners to talk about the book, right? And then we can do that.
Yeah.
Peter, awesome. Congratulations.
Yay, Peter.
And then I believe that's one more time. Yes. Okay. one more time and we'll have our final winner for this session today. Okay, so, and our final winner is Christian. Congratulations to all of our winners both today and during these past virtual events. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it back to Michelle for any final thoughts, and we'll conclude today's session. Oh, we're good. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us. And if you won the giveaway, expect an email from me later tonight. And thank you all for joining us. And please participate in the last day of Free Speech Week events, which is happening tomorrow.
Remind us what time the website launches and the events tomorrow. Do you mind?
Yeah, so I don't think we have a specific time, but it will be launched by the afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, and then tomorrow the other two events are we're opening our submission process for original spoken word poems that sort of touch on the issues of free speech and being empowered to use your voice, or videos that sort of convey what being an inclusive and diverse UC Merced community means to the people who are submitting these videos. So like when you think about that, what does that mean for you? What does that look like? So we encourage you all to
TikTok for this because I've resisted TikTok, but do I need a TikTok now, Onar?
No, you can just, it's in the spirit of TikTok. So they're short videos.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
In the spirit of TikTok. Okay.
Yeah, in the spirit of TikToks. Yeah. So thank you all so much. And yeah, and that's 7 o'clock. And thank you all. And we'll see you. I was going to say tomorrow, but we'll see you when we submit a video.
We'll miss you.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.